Feature films take a lot of time to make. Console video games also take a lot of time to make. If it costs more money and time to produce, generally you expect it to gross higher profits, right? And you want to produce those things because that's going to be where you get most of your income. But sometimes the wait between feature film installments is long, and you might have audiences migrating elsewhere during that time where they're waiting. We've got to figure out a way to keep our audience's attention in that time. Let's face it, James Cameron, you can't wait 12 years in between films. Not yet, anyway. In order to keep an audience satiated in the meantime, why not create smaller, bite-sized pieces of content to hold them over until it arrives? Companies do it in their marketing all the time. Take, for instance, a video game franchise like Pokemon, the highest grossing media franchise of all time. Let's just look at their marketing strategy in between releases of their main series video games. Every 3 years, Pokemon releases a new pair of titles that serves as the next generation in their franchise. 3 years is a long time to wait for a new mainline game. For almost a year before the release of the new generation, Nintendo, Game Freak, and the Pokemon Company will release new pieces, new trailers, with monsters, new game mechanics, all preparing for the release of their game. There's an entire community, mostly on YouTube, that keeps the hype train going for that entire year up until the release. The Pokemon Company knows that by releasing these little bits of information, this community is going to produce a ton of content and continue that conversation. But we're still talking about marketing, right? What does this have to do with transmedia? All the Pokemon Company needs to do is just drop a trailer, and the audience is satisfied until the release because there's this conversation that's happening the whole time. They are only able to do that because they've built an audience over the past 3 decades. So where does this leave you, an independent creator who doesn't have a big community like that makes content about your stuff, at least not exclusively? Well, you could be doing the same thing. You can make the bite-sized content in the meantime, but yours has to have substance. So let's say you've successfully made an independent video game on Unity and it's doing really well. And you're planning on doing a sequel, but it's gonna take 3 years. In that 3 years, you could be recording a podcast that takes place in the world of your game. You could write a book about a certain character that's gonna become much more prevalent in the sequel. You could do a web series on YouTube that develops the main character's backstory and shows us what led to the events of the first game. Now all this seems like a lot of work, and it is, especially while developing this game, but this is the point where independent creators need to start looking at their art as more of a business. Businesses grow out of necessity. The more your audience grows, the more money you make, but the higher the demand is for your stuff that you have to keep up with. If you can't do all of these things at once, great. I'm glad you're honest with yourself. No one expects you to be doing this all on your own while still having time to eat, sleep, and have mental health days. If you are creating at the level of big releases, you're gonna need a team. Scott Cawthon, the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's, created several installments of the franchise on his own before he teamed up with Steel Wool Studios, who helped develop the last 2 games in the franchise, Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted and Security Breach. This is where working with a transmedia producer is extremely helpful. Beyond helping you develop more stories in your story world, the producer's job is to hire other people who are good at other things and that can help you and collaborate with you on things outside of your skill set. I wouldn't expect a filmmaker to write a song unless they were also an incredibly talented musician. In conclusion, the best way to keep your story in the conversation is to keep making new stuff. Definitely release the big ticket items, but make sure to pepper in some smaller stuff in between. I gotta do that over again.
When is the McRib back? The McRib is gross. What the fuck kind of horn was that? Sounded like a choir just died.
How you doing?
I was trying. Oh, I did it.
Yeah. Nintendo, Game Freak, and the Pokemon Company. All the Pokemon. You could do a web series on YouTube that did. Yeah? Is it something?
Yeah. For backstory, I will pepper in the fact that I am gay.